This whiskey right here is trying to turn the tables. This week, let me tell you about the Turntable and Dingle collaboration that mixes Dingle pot still with some Scotch whiskies. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Matt, I'm the Whiskey Nerd, and like I said, this week I'm looking at a whiskey that's trying to turn the tables. I'm looking at the Turntable collaboration with Dingle Irish Whiskey. So let me tell you a little bit more about it. Now, this is a pretty rare thing to see, like international blends. I mean, Ireland and Scotland, very, very close to each other, like physically, geographically, culturally, historically, but we both say that we invented whiskey. They spell it wrong, we spell it right. It's a whole different thing. But what we have here is a collaboration where Turntable have blended Irish whiskey with Scottish whiskey together. So it is quite a nice thing to see a company actually saying, look here, we both make good whiskey, let's just put them together. Ali and Gordon Stevenson, the founders of Turntable, they do blending. Basically, they're like a blending house. It's not a new thing in Scottish whiskey or Irish whiskey where a blending house might take whiskies from different distilleries, mix them together and make something kind of better than the sum of its parts. But the fact that it is like an Irish and Scottish whiskey collaboration makes it a little bit better. This is the collaboration drop number 2 from Turntable, and this is the one with Dingle. So they've done a few releases before. They're all kind of small batches. They generally have like a musical theme where the name of the kind of song might match up with the flavor of the whiskey, like Bittersweet Symphony or Smoke and Riff, where it was like a bittersweet whiskey or like a smoky whiskey. So they do kind of come up with something. There's no real musical name here for this one. It's just the collaboration drop with Dingle, but they do say they're trying to highlight the kind of peppery, spicy notes you do get in Dingle's pot still, because this is mixing Irish pot still whiskey with Scottish single malt whiskey and Scottish grain whiskey. Now, a long time ago, when people were making whiskey, chances are Scottish single malt whiskey was actually more like a pot still, because like if you imagine when you didn't have like scientific method, you didn't have like really effective machinery, you just had people trying their best, there probably would have been some barley grains in there that didn't get fully malted, that they would have stayed unmalted. So you would have had a single malt whiskey that might have been like 90, 95, maybe like 80%, depending on the distillery, depending on the skill of their staff, would have had mostly malted barley with a little bit of unmalted barley. Now today with modern machinery you can make sure all that barley is fully malted, but kind of historically Irish pot still and like Scottish malt whiskey would have been roughly similar, or maybe it had a lot more similarities than it does today. But it is those whiskies of today we are focusing on, where it is going to be a pot still Irish whiskey where it's 60% malted barley, 40% unmalted barley mixed with two different malt whiskies and one grain whiskey. And in a thing I really appreciate, on the back of it, they actually give you the full breakdown, so I'll read it out to you. It is 41% Dingle single pot still in Oloroso Hogsheads, and they say the leading note there is going to be leather and tobacco notes. It's 29% Balmenach first fill PX Puncheons, which is a leading note of a chocolate walnut cake. 12% Blair Athol first fill in Rye Barrels, with nutmeg and orange peel being the main note there. And 18% Loch Lomond Grain in first fill bourbon casks, giving you vanilla and honey notes. And that's kind of interesting, because if you take that percentages together, you've got 41% Irish single pot still, and you've got 41% Scottish malt. So actually, but it's two different whiskies, but it's 41% malt. So it's equal amounts of those two kind of flavor profiles. And then there's 18% at the very end of grain whiskey, which is kind of neutral enough. Like grain whiskey made in Ireland, grain whiskey made in Scotland should be pretty much the same, like depending on the grain they use, but it's not as complex as the difference between pot still and malt whiskey. So it is going to be really interesting to see if the whiskey has that a more of an Irish profile or more of a Scottish profile, or if it does come right down the middle. It does come in at 52% alcohol by volume, so there's a nice bit of weight to it, and I think it's non-chill filtered, as you can tell from that lovely rich colour. So I think that's all there is to say about it. Let's go in from the nose. Cheers. Okay, like there is a lot here of like sherry coming through. It is a big, heavy, meaty sherry bomb. I mean, you do have Oloroso sherry, PX Puncheons, then you got rye and bourbon, but you got a real big hit of sherry coming through, because looking at the percentages there, it's 70% of it is in Oloroso and PX sherry. So you're going to get really heavy, meaty sherry, but it's backed up by quite a lot of spice. You do get like like that. Like, I don't want to be just following the notes on the back, but you do get a lot of like earthy tobacco, kind of leather kind of notes there on the nose. Yeah, it has that kind of like Dingle herbal character to the malt, but it's deeper, it's richer, it's heavier. It's almost like figs and like dried raisins. There's a bit of like chocolate in there, like I'd say like not like a full dark chocolate, like not like a 70% dark chocolate, but also not like a 35% milk chocolate, somewhere like a 50% cocoa, where you have that, you're getting a lot of like the cocoa spice, you're getting a little bit of the dark bitter notes, but you're not getting like those heavy, really like punchy, almost acidic bitter notes of the chocolate coming through. There's a bit of nutmeg, there's a bit of ginger, but like it also is really sweet. Like I know I said it was a sherry bomb, but like quite toffee, like sticky toffee pudding is kind of the note I'm getting, where it has that, like it's a fig kind of pudding with brown sugar and this really thick, heavy, like toffee caramel sauce coming through, and that's really like sweet on the nose. So I'm gonna go in for the palate and see how that is. Cheers. It is heavy and oily and rich, and like you get this big hit of sweetness followed up by this big hit of spice. Like you can tell it's up at 52%. Like there's not really a huge alcohol burn, but it arrives with a big punch of sweetness and then spice, and then those earthy notes again, like those tobacco kind of leather notes. The chocolatey note is still there, but it is more like that kind of bitter, heavy, dark cocoa note coming through. Again, like that sweetness. I'm on the finish now already, but like it's quite sticky toffee. It's quite heavy and rich and dense, but it's got this massive, I don't want to say attack up front, but it's got this big, heavy hit up front of the spice. So I'm going to go in again and see if I can find more of the fruity notes in the whiskey. Cheers. Second sip round, like I was getting toffee and like burnt brown sugar, some of like that PX, the Pedro Jimenez sherry, like that syrupy character is definitely rounding out the sweetness. Like I got a little bit again of that Dingle character. There's like a little bit of like minty note almost, but like it's like a mint dark chocolate, where you get that mint mixed with dark chocolate and you get this, it's not fully mint, but it's like a minty note where you get a little bit of like a herbal kind of twist on those other flavors coming through. Yeah, just really like, again, no real ABV burn, but just like a big hit of flavor, like those really dark notes backed up by this like core sweet flavor that prevents it being so heavy. All you're tasting are those dark, kind of almost overpowering notes. So I'm going to go in again. This time, focus on the finish. Cheers. Okay. Yeah, quite nice, quite sweet, and then that sweetness fades and leaves with those dark notes. Like it is a whiskey, like their logo, it's two T's, which I think is actually pretty apt. I know it's for a turntable, but this is a whiskey almost of like two halves. Like you have this sweet big hit that fades pretty quickly on the finish and leaves you with these like dark pepper, ginger spice, dark almost like bitter cinnamon, not bitter cinnamon, bitter chocolate notes. Like you get these big heavy deep earthy notes that last on longer. So it is like a whiskey of two halves. Like if that sweetness was like the main note up front, it also is the main note that fades quickly, leaving you with those earthy, deeper, heavy notes. Before I give my final thoughts on this whiskey, if you're new here, scroll down, hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button. I put out whiskey reviews like this every Wednesday, and I put out cocktail recipes featuring whiskey every Friday. So if you want to see more like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and leave me a note down in the comments and say if there's any whiskies you think I should review in the future. But now some of my final thoughts. I like this whiskey. I don't think everyone will like this whiskey. And when I say that is because it's really heavy. It's really got those like cigar, tobacco, leather notes that last really long into the finish. So if you are a person who likes the lighter, fruitier, sweeter whiskeys, like you're not really going to find a lot to like here. But if you like those deep, earthy, dark whiskey notes, you're going to get a lot to like here. Like I've not tried any other whiskeys from Turntable. I've only tried this one, so I can't tell you if that's like their normal style to have those darker, earthier notes, but definitely in this whiskey, it's heavy. And even say it here, it's like a full body dram that immerses the senses, cigar spices, chocolate raisin notes, lay a foundation for hints of marzipan, nutmeg, and citrus. Like I really didn't get a lot of citrus, maybe a little bit of orange peel, but like, no, it was mostly those heavy, dark, earthy notes. Like I would not really have probably guessed that there was like 41% Irish single pot still whiskey here. The Scottish whiskey is, I think, a bit more dominant. Like obviously there's more Scottish whiskey than single pot still Irish whiskey in there, but like I said earlier, it is like equal parts single malt and single pot still, with the remainder being made of grain whiskey, which should be pretty neutral. But I think those, the Balmenach, the Blair Athol, I think they had a bit of a more dominant note with those really heavy, dark, like tobacco notes in there, with a little bit of dingle lightness coming in, the minty notes, the bit of fruitiness there, and a bit of peppery spice probably from the pot still, giving it a little bit of like, again, that heat and that kind of like, again, contributing probably to those darker notes. So I think as a blend, it works pretty well. Turntable say when they blend their whiskies, they leave them to marry for 3 months before they pour them out into bottles. I'm not sure how much of a difference that'll make. I mean, like if it's in a neutral container where it's not like in a cask where it's going to pick up extra flavors, just leaving it there for 3 months might not make a big difference, because right now it's still marrying in the bottle, so you're still going to get that. But like, it does seem like it's pretty well incorporated. It's not, I said it was like a whiskey of two halves in like the finish, but it's not like two different components fighting. Like, it does seem pretty well blended together. So like I said, I like it. It's probably the most interesting whiskey I've had in a while. Like, it's definitely the most interesting whiskey I've had so far this year, but it's definitely one that I think if you don't like scotches, you don't like those dark notes, you might not like this, but if you do, you can find a lot to like here. And I have found a lot to like here, so I'm going to keep on enjoying it, and I'll see you next time. Sláinte.